नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Text 25. Sutta Uvacha Yudhishthara Tad Akhyanya Sayanam Sarapanjare Aprachar Vidhan Dharmam Vishinam Chanushan Vatam.
Sutta Goswami said, Maharaja Yudhishthir, after hearing Bhisma Deva speak in that appealing tone, asked him in the presence of all the great rishis about the essential principles of various religious duties.
26. Purushashva Bhava Vitan Yatha Vanam Yatashanam Vairagya Ragopadi Bhayam Amanato Bhaya Lakshanam.
At Maharaja Yudhishthir's inquiry, Bhisma Deva first defined all the classifications of caste and orders of life in terms of the individual's qualifications. Then he systematically, in twofold divisions, described counteraction by detachment and interaction by attachment.
Text 27. Dana Dharma Raja Dharma Moksha Dharma Vivakshah Shri Dharman Bhagavad Dharmam Samasa Vyasa Yogatah.
He then explained by divisions acts of charity, the pragmatic activities of a king and activities for salvation. Then he described the duties of women and devotees both briefly and extensively.
Text 28. Dharmatha Kar Mokshamscha Sahopayan Yatha Mune Nana Khyane Tisthas Senu Varnayam Masa Tattvatit.
Then he described the occupational duties of different orders and statutes of life, citing instances from history, for he was for himself well acquainted with the truth.
Text 29. Dharmam प्रवदस्तस्य स काला प्रत्युपस्थितः योगिनश्छन्दमृत्यो वञ्चितस्तुतरायणः.
When Bhisma Deva was describing occupational duties, the sun's course ran into the northern hemisphere. This period is described by mystics who die at their will.
Text 30. तदोपशय मृत्य गिर सश्रेणीर विमुक्त संगम मनादि पुरुषे कृष्ण लसत पितपते चतुर्भुजे पूरा स्थिते मिलिता व्याधार्यत.
Thereupon, that man who spoke on different subjects with thousands of meanings and who fought on thousands of battlefields and protected thousands of men, stopped speaking, and being completely freed from all bondage, withdrew his mind from everything else and fixed his wide eyed opens upon the original personality of Godhead, Sri Krishna, who stood before him, four-handed, dressed in yellow garments that glittered and shined.
Text 31. विशुद्धया धर्मनाया हृता शुभस् तत् इक्षाय वासु गता युध शमः निवृत्त सवेन्द्रियरिति विभ्रमस् दुस्ताव जनियम विसर्जा जनार्दनम.
By pure meditation, looking at Lord Sri Krishna, he at once was freed from all material inauspiciousness and was relieved of all bodily pains caused by the arrow wounds. Thus, all the external activities of his senses at once stopped, and he prayed transcendently to the controller of all living beings while quitting his material body.
Text 32. श्री भीष्म उवाच इति मति उपकल्पितत् वितृष्णा भगवती सात्वत पुंगवे विभुमनि स्वसुखम उद्गते क्वचित् विहर्तुं प्रकृतिम उपयुषि यद्भवाहः.
Bhisma Deva said, Let me now invest my thinking, feeling, and willing, which were so long engaged in different subjects and occupational duties, in the all powerful Lord Sri Krishna. He is always self satisfied, but sometimes, being the leader of the devotees, He enjoys transcendental pleasure by descending to the material world, although from him only the material world is created.
Text 33. Could you scroll up, please? त्रिभुवन कमनम तमाल वर्णम रविकर गौरव वर अंबरम दधानी वपु अल्लाह का खुला वर्ताना नाम भजम विजय सखे सती अस्तु में नवदया.
Sri Krishna is the intimate friend of Arjuna. He has appeared on this earth in his transcendental body, which resembles the bluish color of the tamala tree. His body attracts everyone in the three planetary system, upper, middle, and lower. May his glittering yellow dress and his lotus face, covered with paintings of sandalwood pulp, be the object of my attraction, and may I not desire fruitive results.
Text 34. युधि तरगो राज विदुम्र विश्वक कच ललिता शमवारी अलकृत तस्ये मम निशिता शारे विद्यामान तची विलसत कवचेस्तु कृष्ण आत्मा.
On the battlefield where Sri Krishna attended Arjuna out of friendship, the flowing hair of Lord Krishna turned ashen due to the dust risen by the hoofs of the horses, and because of his labor, beads of sweat wetted his face. All these decorations, intensified by the wounds dealt by my sharp arrows, were enjoyed by him. Let my mind thus go unto Sri Krishna.
Text 35. सपदि सखी वश निष्मय मध्ये निज प्रय बल्यो रथम निवश्य सीतावती पर सनिकायु अक्षणा भूतावती पाता सखे रति ममास्तु.
In obedience to the command of his friend Lord Sri Krishna, entered the arena of the battlefield of Kurukshetra between the soldiers of Arjuna and Duryodhana. And while there, he shortened the lifespans of the opposite party by his merciful glance. This was done simply by his looking at the enemy. Let my mind be fixed upon that Krishna.
Text 36. Vayahita pratana mukham nirikshya sajan vadha vivukshaya dosa budaya kumutim atma vidaya yas charana rati paramasya tasya mestu.
When Arjuna was seemingly polluted by ignorance, upon observing the soldiers and commanders before him on the battlefield, the Lord eradicated his ignorance by delivering transcendental knowledge. May his lotus feet always remain the object of my attraction.
Text 37. Sa nigamam apaya mata pratigram rutam adhikartum avalupta ratastatha dhuta ratha charano pyaj saladgur hari eva hantum ibam gotottariyaha.
Fulfilling my vow and sacrificing his own promise, he got down from the chariot, took up its wheel, and ran towards me hurriedly, just as a lion goes to kill an elephant. He even dropped his outer garment on the way.
Text 38. Sita Vishaka Hato Vishana Damashaha Sataja Paripluta Patatayino me Vashamba Abhishashar Madhvadatam Sabkundaha.
May he, Lord Sri Krishna, the personality of Godhead, who awards salvation, be my ultimate destination. On the battlefield, he charged me as if angry because of the wounds dealt by my sharp arrows. His shield was scattered, and his body was smeared with blood due to the wounds.
Text 39. Vijay Rata Kutamba Atatotre Yutahya Rashmini Tachachiya Shanaye Bhagavati Rati Astume Mumusho Yam Iha Nirikshya Pata Gatasa Rupam.
At the moment of death, let my ultimate attraction be to Sri Krishna, the personality of Godhead. I concentrate my mind upon the chariot driver of Arjuna, who stood with a whip in his right hand and a bridle rope in his left, who was very careful to give protection to Arjuna's chariot by all means. Those who saw him on the battlefield of Kurukshetra attained their original forms after death.
Text 40. Lalita Gati Vilasa Valguhasa Pranaya Nikshana Kalpitoru Manaha Kutam Anukritya Madana Dana Prakutim Akila Yasha Gopa Vadavaha.
Let my mind be fixed upon Lord Shri Krishna, whose motions and smiles of love attracted the damsels of Brajadama, the gopis. The damsels imitated the characteristic movements of the Lord after his disappearance from the rasa dance.
Text 41. Could you please scroll up, please? Munigana Rupa Varya Sankule Nata Sadasi Yudhisa Rajashu Esham Ahanam Uppeda Ikshanyo Mama Drushi Gochara Esha Avi Atma.
At the Rajasuya Yajna sacrifice performed by Maharaja Yudhishthira, there was the greatest assembly of all the elite men of the world, the royal and the learned orders, and in that great assembly, Lord Sri Krishna was worshipped by one and all as the most exalted personality of Godhead. This happened during my presence, and I remember the incidents in order to keep my mind upon the Lord.
Text 42. Tamimam aham ajam sharit bhajam vidhi riddhi dhistitam atma kalpitanam padi drusham iva naikadatam ekam samadhi gatasa viduta veda mohaha.
Now I can meditate with full concentration upon that one Lord, Sri Krishna, now present before me, because now I have transcended the misconceptions of duality in regard to his presence in everyone's heart and even in the hearts of the mental speculators. He is in everyone's heart. The sun may have perceived differently, but the sun is one.
Text 43. Sutavasha Krishna evam bhagavati manovaga dusivati bihi atmani atmanam aveshya na nasta shavasa uparamata.
Suta Goswami said, thus Bhisma Deva merged himself into the Super Soul, Lord Sri Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, with his mind, speech, sight, and actions, and thus he became silent and his breathing stopped.
Text 44. Sampadaya manam ajnaya Vishma brahmani niskale sarva bhavushtu tushnim vyayami shiva dhananjaya.
Knowing that Bhisma Deva had merged into the limited eternity of the Supreme Absolute, all present there became silent like birds at the end of the day.
Text 45. Tatra dandu bhayo nedu deva mana vaditaha sasam shu sadhava rajanam khata petu pushpa vushtayaha.
Thereafter, both men and demigods sounded drums in honor, and the honest royal order commenced demonstrations of honor and respect, and from the sky fell showers of flowers.
Text 46. Tasya naha nadini samprare tasya bhargava yudhishthara karyetava muhurtam dukhito bhavata.
O descendant of Bhrigu, Shaunaka, after performing funeral rituals for the dead body of Bhisma Deva, Maharaja Yudhishthira was momentarily overtaken with grief.
Text 47. Tustuva munya hristaha krishnam tadguya nababhihi tataste krishna hridayaha shasharanamam pranayu punaha.
all the great sages that glorified Lord Sri Krishna, who was present there by confidential Vedic hymns. Then all of them returned to their respective hermitages, bearing always Lord Krishna within their hearts.
Text 48. Tatra yudhisha gatva sa Krishna gaja vayam itaram santavyam asa gandharim cha tapasvinim.
Thereafter, Maharaja Yudhishthira at once went to his capital, Hastinapura, accompanied by Lord Sri Krishna, and there he consoled his uncle and aunt Gandhari, who was an ascetic.
Text 49. Pitra chanumata raja asudevanu moditaha chakarajyam dharmena pitru pitamaham vibhuha.
After this, the great religious king Maharaja Yudhishthira executed the royal power in the kingdom strictly according to the codes of royal principles approved by his uncle and confirmed by Lord Sri Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, thank you.
Thank you. Sorry for any mistakes I made. I wasn't prepared for this.
Hare Krishna, everyone. Thank you so much, Krishnangi Mataji and Shakshi Mataji. You read that beautifully. So we're coming towards the end of this chapter, the passing away of Bhishma Dev. And he's passing away in the presence of Lord Krishna. So just to give you a quick summary before we drill into the 3 verses, 44, 45, and 46. So at the beginning of this chapter, Maharaj Yudhishthira goes with his younger brothers and Krishna in an opulent procession to the battlefield where Bhishma Dev is lying on a bed of arrows. They're going in an opulent procession because, of course, they've been victorious. And grandfather Bhishma, although he was on the other side, he was on the side of Duryodhana. And as a result, he was lying on this bed of arrows. It doesn't mean that because he was on the other side that he wasn't a devotee of the Lord and a well-wisher of the Pandavas. And we know that there are many complexities and politics and so many aspects that happen in a royal court, though we shouldn't see it as very black and white. So we know that grandfather Bhishma, he made what they say a terrible vow, but his vow was to ensure that he protected the kingdom. So he's very, very pleased that the Pandavas have come to him. And the great rishis are also assembled. And grandfather Bhishma, even though he's lying on a bed of arrows, he's got his the ability and the capacity that devotees have, even at the time of death, that they have the sense of awareness around them. And grandfather Bhishma properly welcomes and receives them, especially Lord Krishna, because of course grandfather Bhishma is very aware of who Lord Krishna is. Then Bhishma Dev, he then, thank you for muting. So Bhishma Dev then congratulates the Pandavas with loving tears, and he's so moved and he's crying, and he speaks of the tribulations and the injustices that they had suffered prior to the battle. And there were times where he tried to protect them, but there were other times where he was just very aware of the what's the word, the unfairness of the treatment, and they were just, I think we know that when someone experiences suffering, and it can be very painful, and if we're watching and it doesn't mean that because we're intervening that, we care. But Grandfather Bhishma, he also had faith in Krishna, that ultimately the Pandavas would be victorious. And there he sees now, before he dies, his almost a dying wish that he was going to hand over the kingdom, the protection of the kingdom, to the Pandavas. So he explains to the Pandavas, because sometimes we have a very shallow understanding of karma, that sometimes people, certainly great devotees, here we see that they're suffering, and the question begs that, are they suffering because of some bad karma? But not in this situation, because Bhishma Dev resides ultimately in the Vaikuntha planets, and when the Lord comes down, he comes down with his associates to undertake his pastime. So Bhishma Dev is one of those associates, and so the Pandavas, they're great souls, and so there's an understanding and an explanation that whilst they're suffering, it is not due to their bad karma, but I suppose the Lord acknowledges, and Bhishma Dev acknowledges, that great devotees, it's not what they suffer, it's how they handle it. And Bhishma Dev is telling the Pandavas that it's because of the Lord's inconceivable time, or inevitable time, but inconceivable plan of the Lord. So that they accept whatever happens is the plan of the Lord, and that he then begins to instruct Yudhishthira. Now it's for him to protect the citizens. And then Bhishma Dev begins, as great devotees do, they Nam, Gun, Roop, he begins to describe the glories and the actual position of Lord Krishna, and appreciates that Lord Krishna personally has come before him at the time of his death. I mean, isn't that wonderful? We pray and we beg for the Vishnu Dutas, that we hope that the Vishnu Dutas will be there at the time of our death. At the time of Gajendra's death, the Lord appears in his four-armed form, but here the Lord Krishna appears in person. So that tells us that actually Bhishma Dev is how many times in the Bhagavatam do we actually read that the Lord, yes, the Lord personally kills the demons and he delivers his devotees, but here the Lord is there in front of him. It's inconceivable actually to understand how glorious that is. So in the presence of the rishis, Maharaj Yudhishthira then asks Bhishma Dev about what are the essential principles, the various religious duties. And at that point, we read last week that Bhishma Dev instructs Maharaj Yudhishthira on Varnashram Dharma. So thereafter, Bhishma Dev continues to describe about our occupational duties, the auspicious time for departure, and he then withdraws his consciousness from the world and focuses solely on Lord Krishna. And then finally, what we've been reading today, just coming towards the end, is Bhishma Dev then begins to withdraw from everything, and then he begins to especially fix his mind on remembering Krishna. But how does he remember Krishna? He remembers Krishna on the battlefield as the chariot driver of Arjuna. So, this is Grandfather Bhishma's eternal relationship with the Lord, that not just on this planet, but other planets, other times, other dimensions, other realities, that when the Lord is undertaking a battle, Bhishma Dev is there. And so that's his original position, that he takes part in the battle. And then he remembers the gopis, and he then desires their mercy, along with Krishna being worshipped at Maharaj Yudhishthira's Rajasuya Yagya. And then concentrating his mind, his speech, his sight, his actions upon Krishna. I mean, that is absolutely incredible that, at the time of death, when the body is failing, you can't breathe properly, in terms of your sight, we have no control over what we're seeing. Are we seeing the Yamadutas, who's actually, because the process of death in itself is usually a very painful one. But here, Bhishma Dev is because of his, his past good fortune and the benedictions he was given, he could actually choose when he was going to die. So it tells us what a great soul he was. Of course, he was one of the Mahajans. And then he breathes his last breath, and then King Yudhishthira performs the funeral ceremony, and all the sages depart, and Yudhishthira begins ruling the kingdom according to the instructions he's been given by Bhishma Dev. So in purport 44, 45, and 46, one of the key things that Srila Prabhupada tells us is that the Vaikuntha planets are self-illuminating like the sun. This is where Grandfather Bhishma has gone to. And the rays of the Vaikuntha planet are called Brahmajyoti. So the Brahmajyoti, although they spread unlimitedly, and in the material world, it is covered by a portion of that insignificant part of the Brahmajyoti. For us in the material world, it's temporary, and therefore it's kind of an illusion. And the reason why it's an illusion is that there's only so far you can get to an awareness of Brahmajyoti. But in the Vaikuntha planets, you experience in its fullness, in its joy, and its mercy, and its benevolence. So because Grandfather Bhishma was a pure devotee of the Lord, and he enters into the spiritual realm in one of his, as I've explained, in one of his eternal forms as Parthasarthi, he predominates over many, many pastimes, at many yugas, many dimensions, many realities in this way. And Srila Prabhupada says it's the highest perfection when the Lord appears in front of you. And what does that mean? That the Lord is carrying that soul with him. So purport 45 is very interesting, because what I would say to you is that if you get a chance to really drill into this purport, it's very, very profound. And I'm going to just read it because it's very short. Bhishma Dev was respected both by the human beings and the demigods. Human beings live on Earth, and similarly other planets in the Bur and Bua group of planets. But the demigods live in Swa, or the heavenly planets, and all of them knew Bhishma Dev as a great warrior and a devotee of the Lord. So that's the greatness of Bhishma Dev. He's not just known. Sometimes we think we may be well known in our little home, or in our little street, or in our little work, or in the temple, and it's sometimes for people, it could be a great sense of pride. Look how important I am. But here we can see that his fame, Grandfather Bhishma's fame, was so expansive across so many planets. Now, in all these planets, they've it says here, Bubua planets live in the Swa, or heavenly planets, and all of them knew Bhishma Dev as a great warrior and devotee of the Lord. As a Mahajan or authority, he was at the level of Brahma, Narada, and Shiva, although he was a human being. Qualification on a par with great demigods is possible only by the attainment of spiritual perfection. Thus, Bhishmadev was known all over the universe, and during his interplanetary travel was effected by finer methods than the futile endeavors of mechanical spacecraft. So it just tells us that how he could do interplanetary travel. When the distant planets were informed of the passing of Bhishmadev, all the inhabitants of the upper planets, as well as of the earth, dropped showers of flowers to show respect to the departed great personality. This showering of flowers from heaven is a sign of recognition by great demigods, and it should never be compared to the decoration of a dead body. The dead body of Bhishmadev lost its material effects due to being surcharged with spiritual realization. And thus, the body was spiritualized as when iron becomes red hot, when in contact with fire. The body of a fully realized soul is not therefore accepted as material. Special ceremonies are observed for such spiritual bodies. The respect and the recognition of Bhishmadev are never to be imitated by artificial means, as it has become the fashion to observe in the so-called Jayanti ceremony for any and every common man. According to authorized Shastras, such a Jayanti ceremony for an ordinary man, however exalted he may be, materially is an offense to the Lord, because Jayanti is reserved for the day when the Lord appears on the day. Bhishmadev was unique in his activities, and his passing away to the kingdom of God is also unique. Before I go on to the next verse, I just wanted to check in with all of you about what was the most inspiring aspect of chapter 9 for you, and how has it inspired you in your personal life or motivated you? Would anybody like to share?
Hare Krishna, Mataji.
Hare Krishna.
Yeah, I think chapter 9, it inspires us, by Bhishmadev, Pitama. He is just setting an example how, we should leave the body. So it's just, teaching us how we should prepare for living this material world. So that's what that is what I have learned from it. Haribol.
Thank you very much, Krishna Vani Mataji. And when we see videos of Srila Prabhupada taking his last breath, he's still speaking about Lord Krishna, and he's still glorifying Lord Krishna. When you see that, we've seen videos of that, or devotees have experienced that. Both Srila Prabhupada and Bhishmadev have set such great examples of our, our final time. Was there anything in particular that drew out for you? Because of course you're attending these classes and you're listening, which is a very powerful way of actually engaging with the Bhagavatam. But equally, synthesizing and processing what we've read is also really, really important. Is there anybody else who'd like to make a contribution?
Hare Krishna Mataji, my Dandavat pranams to you.
Hare Krishna.
I wasn't present for so many classes because I went to India, so I've just joined in. So I'm just trying to join in again. My one question that came in my mind is, though we know that Krishna's pastimes are all his devotees in spiritual world, they come to the material world when Krishna comes and does his Leela. So everything is a part of the Leela. But if you see from a non-devotee's eyes, when during Draupadi's what do you call that? When Draupadi was brought into the court and she was disrobed. That time Bhishma Pitama, he was there and all the elders were there. And one of the questions Draupadi did ask the elders to rescue her, to stop the thing. But then nobody, because obviously Bhishma Pitama was in the Kauravas group, though he was the kind of the eldest in the family, but nobody helped. So how do, if like in law of karma, how will you place this situation when a helpless lady is saying something and the elders are not protecting? Sorry, it's a kind of a bit of out of the context question, but this came in my mind.
So what's your point in terms of relation to grandfather Bhishma? Are you saying that whilst, Draupadi was being disrobed and everything we've read in the Bhagavatam talks about protecting, because we've read this before, we protect women, elderly men, cows, children. So are you saying that in that instance where Dharma says that you should be protecting a woman, in the court where grandfather Bhishma was the elder grandsire, are you saying why didn't he intervene? Is that your question?
Yeah, so it's like when we are glorifying Bhishma, because he was such a great soul. That's why Krishna is coming at the time of death. Krishna is in front of him. So how? But according to law of karma, he did not kind of. I mean, it's not dharma, isn't it? So when you're not protecting somebody who is helpless.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So when we see it from a point that, Bhishma should have taken action, that's why morality is very complex. If we try to understand morality separate from Krishna, then we will just become judgmental, because in that instance, in a material level, we'll see grandfather Bhishma as a hypocrite. We'll see him as someone who didn't act when he should have. But if you see it from a point that Draupadi was also a pure devotee and he was a pure devotee, suppose somehow that when a pure devotee acts simply for the pleasure of the Lord, that that the devotee has the ability to listen to the Lord's will, the Lord's direction. We have to understand that sometimes we think we are very much in control, and the Lord is the ultimate sanctioner. So when the Lord, because he's also within the heart, if the Lord sanctions for Bhishma to speak, then he would have spoken, because he's a Mahajan. If the Lord didn't sanction it and Bhishma in his consciousness was meditating on the Lord, this is the only way I can understand it, is that if Bhishma is a pure devotee will feel, think, will act according to the Lord's directions. A pure devotee will have the ability to hear the directions of the Lord. So whatever happened in the court was also one of, the Pandavas had actually engaged, or Maharaj Yudhishthira had engaged in the gambling match, also with the consequences. So when we really think about it, we think, well, maybe it was Pandava's fault, Maharaj Yudhishthira, he gambled away his wife. Then we can think, well, another man like grandfather Bhishma, he didn't say anything. But what we have to understand is that when a devotee suffers and a devotee goes through difficulty and they think around them, look, all these devotees were around me, why didn't they come to help me? Then we have to understand that if Draupadi didn't experience what she experienced, she was the first of all the Pandavas, in the first one from even Grandfather Bhishma, to actually, call out on the Lord and pull her hands out and say, "Hey, Govinda." She had totally and utterly surrendered. So it's very difficult to try and make a moral judgment on it. But if you go right to the back and you think right to the end, then we can say that actually it was probably the Lord's will that facilitated that situation to glorify Draupadi's greatness. And had that situation not happened, had nobody not said anything, then Draupadi would have been again materially dependent. Now, time and time again, we read in Bhagavatam that Srila Prabhupada says that there's no material relationship that can save us. And here we get a beautiful example of how Draupadi surrenders to the Lord. And the Lord appears and gives her unlimited saris as she's being disrobed. I think that's the only thing we can understand. The other thing is that the Lord and his devotees, it's very bewildering. This is why in Krishna consciousness it is said that your greatest the greatest offense is to offend a devotee or to say anything bad about them, because that in itself is a destruction of your spiritual life. So whilst outwardly it may look immoral, spiritually everything was unfolding for the Pandavas, and for Draupadi, she had 5 great husbands, but here in the end, it teaches us that no matter what, we should always depend on Krishna.
Beautiful answer, Mataji. Thank you so much. Thank you. Hare Krishna.
Thank you, Rupa. It's a great question. It's a great question because it's a question that those who know the Mahabharata and those who begin to read Bhagavatam will always question that. So thank you for asking that. It's really appreciated.
Thank you so much. Hare Krishna.
Is there anybody else who would like to share any realizations or anything that's come up for them?
Hare Krishna, Mataji.
Hare Krishna, Smita.
This Mahabharata is so commonly read by even non-devotees.
Yes.
So it's a good lesson, or it's a good teaching for non-devotees, that if they really call out to Krishna, then Krishna will listen.
Yes.
So that Draupadi really called out to Krishna, and he listened. So maybe it's also for them, non-devotees, to know that if they have enough faith in Krishna, and if they put enough faith in him and call him out and pray to him, he will listen to them.
Yeah, beautiful, beautiful response to Rupa Mataji's question. There's something for everyone, isn't there? In that.
Yeah. Yes. That's
what else, Smita Mataji? What else? Tell us a bit more.
About faith in Krishna.
Yeah.
It's so difficult to bring common people into believing into Krishna. And the first thing I do when I preach to these non-devotees is I say, have you read Mahabharata? And when they say no, then I say, read Mahabharata and Ramayana, and then read Bhagavad Gita. You will understand it more. So it's like to bring them into it and to increase their faith into Krishna. And then when they see that Draupadi was helped twice. One was when she was disrobed, and the second time is when they had those Durvasan and the Shishya came for dinner at her place.
Yes.
And she didn't have any food, and she called out to Krishna again, and he came.
Yeah.
So yeah, sorry, Mataji, I don't know what else to add into it.
No, it's wonderful. Thank you, Smita. And I think, you know, even at a materialistic level, because I know my mother used to always meditate on this very pastime of Draupadi surrendering to the Lord. That, you know, in our times where we may feel humiliated, we may feel let down, we may feel lonely, we may feel abandoned. You know, Draupadi was feeling all of these things. And for an ordinary person, they can understand that if you surrender to Krishna, Krishna will provide the unlimited resource to protect you.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, and so, you know, time and time again, we've been also reading that Lord Krishna doesn't reveal himself to the foolish. Yet, you know, even if you're reading with that, when you're reading, the revelation comes according to your sincerity and your attitude. Yeah, if you have an attitude like I know everything, or, you know, in a critical way, then that, you know, then you won't find any learning. But equally, it will bring up, like Rupa Mataji said, some very difficult moral questions. But those questions in time become they're answered as you experience the revelation of the Lord. So yeah. So
yeah, and as we hear more Bhagavatam and relish it, we realize that Krishna is out there, and he will listen to us, and he will help us and guide us in our life. All we need is faith in Krishna.
Yeah, all we need is faith, and the prayer, isn't it? Like
Yes.
Father Brishma, that please, my Lord, you know, I've got so many faults, I've got so many limitations. You know, you're the Supreme Lord, the cause of all causes. You're the sole object of my desire, and despite my, you know, actually, the truth is that anything, you know, you've existed before, during, after annihilation. Anything without you is illusion, and therefore help me to always remember you in everything. And just like Grandfather Bhishma, please help me to, you know, at the time of death, to always remember you, to be able to glorify you, your role, your form, your pastimes, and to actually meditate on you at the point of my last breath. So that's our prayer, isn't it? That, you know, our wish. The ideal example is to follow Grandfather Bhishma, not so much what he did. Well, we can look at what he did, but if we look from the end to the beginning, then we can understand that somebody who gets to that point must be a very intimate associate with the Lord. So outwardly, in the court, when he was on the side of Duryodhan, when he was living in Hastinapur, whilst the Pandavas were set out in, you know, in those barren lands, and they, you know, they were excluded, and, you know, even at the time of the battle, you know, he was still on the other side. Isn't it so amazing that he was still a pure devotee of the Lord? What does that tell us? Sorry, Smita, did you say something?
Yes, I'm still here. Mataji. It tells us that that he even though he couldn't do anything to protect Draupadi, he was still hurt that he couldn't do anything. He was still upset. We could see that he was very upset for what was happening, and he couldn't do anything to help Draupadi. But
regardless to what happened, he still remained a pure devotee of Krishna. So even in time of trouble, if you feel that there was no help for you,
Yeah.
if you still continue to have faith in Krishna, believe in Krishna, continue praying to Krishna, then you will not fall down. You can rise up, maybe not to the, obviously not to the level of Bhishma Pita, but you will rise, and you will make progress in your bhakti. So the thing to learn is to continue and not to stop. If something goes wrong, then don't blame Krishna for it, but continue. Have faith. Whatever Krishna did is for good.
Faith and patience
Yes,
and
faith, patience.
tolerance, you know.
Yes. Yeah, he had so much, he tolerated so much Bhishma Pita. Duryodhana's behavior, he tolerated so much. His behavior, Dhritarashtra's behavior. When we look back and think about it, Bhishma Pita had a lot of tolerance.
He did.
That's what we need to learn. That's another lesson we can learn from Bhishma Pita, to be tolerant to all the family members.
Yeah, it's a
Isn't
great
it?
example for our own lives, isn't it? You know?
Yeah, because I mean, the slightest thing we are told, and we have a mouthful to give back.
Yeah,
But,
absolutely.
yeah,
Absolutely.
but not to be like that. And I think once even Keshav Maharaj said that as you start putting things into action and you change your thinking and your behavior, you carry that with you in your next life. So if we start thinking that, oh yes, he said that to me, it doesn't matter, you know, I don't have to reply back. And if you sort of change your behavior, your attitude, your if you don't have hard feelings towards them, and you continue your normal relationship, then you carry that in your next life. I was listening to Keshav Maharaj once, and that's what he said. He said, don't do that. He said, just be tolerant, just be nice, just forgive them for what they said. And he said, you will carry, he said that you are building your own life up, your next life. And I was quite surprised that, you know, in this life, whatever we do, however we react, however we behave, we are going to carry it forward.
That's quite profound, isn't it?
Yeah.
And when you think about Grandfather Bhishma, maybe that is a very powerful thing for us to take away, that during his life he tolerated a lot, didn't he? His father, you know, he was of a marriageable age, you know, so eligible, but his father already had one wife, then he wanted another one, and because he didn't want his father to be deprived of, you know, Satyavati, then of course he made the vow, and then in making that vow, he, you know, he put aside his own you know, his whole life, you know, he put aside his own needs, you know, and even when he, you know, and then all of this, I'm sure he must have been thinking even in his mind that had I not made the vow, you know, maybe this wouldn't have happened, and because I'd made the vow, then there were so many issues and intricacies of, you know, because obviously there were issues with Satyavati, and so, you know, she had her son, but there was a whole issue about progeny, wasn't there? He had all of that, his own decisions to make, you know, but ultimately, because he undertakes eternally this role in the spiritual world, we can see that has all been facilitated, but ultimately, Smita Mataji, we still have choice, isn't it? And what a devotee does and how a devotee acts and how a devotee behaves is a mystery. And that is why we have to be very, 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 very careful about devotee aparadh, even in our dealings, because if we put ourselves in a similar situation, just like Rupa Mataji asked this lovely, beautiful question, we can see this in our own life. And I think what you just mentioned, that how we react, how we fire off in any minute, or how we upset other people, we are creating our next body, our next mind, our next ego, all of that. We're creating that for our next life, isn't it? So actually, if we're wise and we're intelligent and we want to begin investing actually for our death, then silence sometimes is golden, or actually, not acting at all unless you're being guided by the Lord. That's the stage we want to get to.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, everyone. Was there anything else you wanted to say, Smita Mataji, before
No. Yeah, that's all. Thank you, Mataji. I think I took too much time. Sorry.
No, thank you so much for your contribution. I think it's wonderful to hear from the group as well, because you don't want to just hear from a teacher or somebody just rattling on. I think we're coming towards the end of this chapter, so there's some deep realizations and things that we want to process within our own lives. So I think if we can go away today feeling inspired, like from the life of Grandfather Bhishma, then we'll understand him, appreciate him, and aspire to live the life that he lived, and it doesn't matter what other people think. It doesn't matter in terms of morality. He acted in a way that he was guided by the Lord because he's an eternal associate. So let's pray that we can one day follow his footsteps. Thank you so much. Please accept my humble obeisances. Please forgive any faults or any errors during today. And I take the dust of your lotus feet on my head and pray for your mercy and your blessings. Panchakalpatarubhyascha kripa sindhubhyavacha patitanam pavanebhyo. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much,
Nandrani,
Mataji.
for very
Hare
nice
Krishna.
class.
Mataji, thank you very much.
Krishna.
Thank you.
Hare
Hare
Krishna.
Thank you.
Hare Krishna.
Hare
Thank you. Hare Krishna.
Leave me.